What up, what up, what up? It's your boy Nicholas Mason coming to you with the evening legislation solely for your mental edification. Let's drop the dime, y'all. So everybody's going pretty much awry. They're going pretty crazy over this Nick Cannon situation and what's going on with Nick Cannon. Nick Cannon, what he said, and I posted this up on my Instagram today because I have it's quite a controversial topic, but the only reason why it's controversial is because of the lack of knowledge that the masses have. Okay. I'm going to talk today about three different things about the white. What is white? Okay. I'm going to talk about the historical province of the caucasoid, and I'm going to talk about what white power is, and then I'm going to talk about white people in America today. Okay. So I'm going to talk about the historical fundamentals of where that Neanderthal, that savage-like mentality that Nick Cannon was talking about. We're going to talk about white power, and then we're going to talk about white people in America, okay? So the first one, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad talks about, and he teaches us, he talks about the great scholar, the Shabazz Yaqub. And before I even get into this, I want to tell people that I wasn't awakened to this information all my life. I became awakened at the age of 18. At the age of 7, I knew I was alive. I knew I was a living being. I knew I had purpose inside of me, and I started to carry it out, and I became a hospitality director. You know, I have a bachelor's degree in hospitality and food and beverage administration. I have an associate's degree in the arts and science of culinary. I'm a person of servitude. I like to bring hospitality, compassion, and light. That's what I do. But for the time we live in now, we have to stretch beyond the measures of our parameters that are naturally given to us to step into the full manifestation that God has called us to do. And that's what I do. But I've had the opportunity to learn from so many great masters and to study that great work. At the age of 18, I was awakened by one of my guides. His name's Cisco. He's a great man, cool as hell. He awakened me out of my theological dormant of believing just in the cross. Now, I'm a man of God. I definitely believe in the principles and the word of God. I do believe in Yahweh Washaya. I definitely believe in the Christ. You know what I'm saying? But I do believe that the earth is the Lord and the fullness thereof, and they that dwell therein, and the dominion was given to Adam. You know, God made us the head and not the tail, above and not beneath. So because of that, I took the time to go research the dominion which was given unto me. And I attuned this knowledge from great scholars such as Dr. John Henrik Clark, Dr. Claude Anderson, Dr. Francis Cress Welsh, Dr. Noble Drew Ali, Khalid Abdul Muhammad, Elisha Muhammad, El Hajj Al Malik Al Shabazz, Nelson Mandela, Tariq Nasheed with his Hidden Colors collection, you know what I mean? Brother Umar Johnson and his understanding of childhood psychology. Just taking the time to study from these great scholars and who have studied and learning the wisdom that they put out. I took that and I concentrated it into my universe, and I made it into my perspective, and I come to share it with you today. So now that I got that out of the way, let's tap into this bad boy. So Elijah Muhammad teaches us that Yaqub comes from the wheel of Enki and Eli. If you know about Enki and Eli, this is the old Sumerian Anunnaki gods. These come out of modern day, what we consider modern day Iran, Afghanistan, India, and parts of Asia. Okay, these are where these gods come from. This is where the entity of a knowledge of good and evil comes from. Where the Garden of Eden is where the knowledge of life comes from. It's a symbolism. This is an innuendo. This is a paradigm of a sentence that I'm giving you. Eden is known as Africa today. It is the progenitor of life, okay? Every civilization, every animal, every source of life comes from out of Kush. It comes from out of Africa, which was named after a Greco-Roman dude named Cicero Africanus. Before it was named Africa, it was named Kush, Mesopotamia, Eden. Moving forward, Sumeria, Anunnaki, the land of the Anunnaki, okay? The Placodians and the reptilians, they come out of Sumeria, okay? They come out of modern day Iran, Afghanistan, and Iraq. This is when Nimrod built the Tower of Babylon. Okay, Nimrod built this Tower of Babylon, and they started to study the sciences and the natures of everything, but they only knew the numerical numbers, but they didn't have the mark of Elohim on them. So because of them not having the mark of Elohim on them, they were considered to make blasphemy creatures that were not from God. Okay, that's where you get the animal splicing. You see how they're cloning shit today, the artificial intelligence we have today, the multiple different ways we have to choose which water bottle is the best water, reverse osmosis water, which one has the highest or best pH balance for you to drink. You know, this is the same things that were happening back then are happening now. In the book of Ecclesiastics, it talks about nothing is new underneath the sun. What was, shall be, has always been, and will always be. Ecclesiastics 1 and 9, I believe so, if I'm correct. Now, what happens is Enki and Eli, these were the Sumerian gods, okay? These are deities. These had superhuman-like abilities, and they dwelled amongst the tillers of the earth, okay? Now, the tillers of the earth happened to live in between the tree of life, which was Eden, and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. They met in a place called Israel. Okay, here we go. In the place of Israel, in order to get into Africa or to get into Samaria, you had to go through this travel route, which was through Israel. So a lot of the fundamental knowledge that we learn from today comes from the passing of the trading routes that led to a lot of information being placed in Israel or Jerusalem. Okay. Now, from that, the people who lived inside of Israel had obtained the sacred knowledge of all 360 degrees. Okay, and this was considered like the Ark of the Covenant, the principles, the laws of Mayat, the laws of the Shekinah glory. You feel me? So, because of this was an understanding and overstanding that was given to the primitive people of the earth. Now, Adam and Eve dwelled within the garden. Okay, and when they dwelled within the garden, because they had access to this knowledge, they had divine ability. Okay, they dwelled with the divine. Okay, and because they participated in animal-like nature, the female Eve, who beguiled her own husband Adam, and said that the serpent beguiled her. I'm going to a whole nother paradigm. But anyway, that leads into a whole story. It's a whole manifestation of the creation of humanity. But what Nick Cannon was talking about, and I got to stick to this because I'm going to go all around. Yaqub created these degenerate white race people. Okay, and how he did it is he took, because the people who lived in Israel, they had the mark of Elohim, which is the sunlight. If you have melanin in your skin, you have the mark of Elohim, which means that you have access to have a connection with the sun. The sun is the progenitor of light and life. Light and life. L-I-G-H-T and L-I-F-E. Okay? Light and life. When the two connect together, it flourishes. Okay? If I put a seed in the dirt and I water it but don't put no light on it, it won't grow. But if I water it and put it in the light, it will grow. Some grow by lunar light, some grow by celestial light. You feel me? So, moving forward, what happens is Yaqub understood that the people of Elohim, or the people of God, had a primitive thinking. All they knew was that they should, stick to the surface level of thinking. They knew they were the best praisers. They would plant their plants, they would sing their songs, they would dance their dances, they would have their music, and they would celebrate each other. But they didn't know that how powerful their gifts really were. To speak, in the beginning, the word was sound. There was no light. It says that the spirit hovered over the face of the deep. It was filled with void, right? And God spoke. So when we speak, the tongue, life and death lies in the power of the tongue. It created something. Yaqub understood this creation, but the people of God did not understand this. Okay, so because of this, when they met Yaqub and they said, "Damn, I ain't never seen a brother like Yaqub before." What made Yaqub look different than them is Yaqub had a head 3 times the size as mine. That's a big ass head, but his head wasn't big for no reason. His head had a brain that was large enough to compute the understanding of Heru and Maketi, which is the Sphinx, what we call the Sphinx, the mastering of your animal-like nature and the mastering of your priesthood, and how to get the best out of it. Because he comes from Samaria, who received a higher knowledge of Inki and Ili. Okay, they received this knowledge from the Anunnakis. All right, so when he realized that the primitive people in the Promised Land didn't understand the real power of information that was around them, he decided to take some of them and say, you know what? I'm going to make a race that's going to govern over you, that's going to control you, that's going to lead you for 6,000 years. And just like how, because he comes from the will, the manifestation process was already coming out to play. Nothing shall leave God's mouth and return back void. Okay? He spoke it out, and the profession of 6,000 years began. These white folks that were created because he removed all the carbon out of their skin. He removed the marking of Elohim out of them, the carbon, the melanin. It was removed from them. They were the total opposite of the highly melanated people. See, the melanated people had compassion. They had love. They were calm, easygoing people. They were sharing because they understood the abundance. They didn't have fear. They didn't have a desire to conquer anything because the conquering only lied within thy own self. But in opposition, and they had brown eyes too. They had black hair. Their hair grew towards the sun. You feel me? They were melanated. And they had spirit. You can see spirit dwell within them and around them through the hue of their skin. Whereas the brothers and sisters who were created and who were stripped of that melanin and that mark of Elohim, they had blue eyes. They had pale skin. Their hair didn't grow towards the sun. Their hair grew downward. Okay? And because their hair grew downward, they were the total opposite. They had fear. They were susceptible to more diseases. They didn't have a desire to receive an alkali diet, to eat from plant life. They wanted to become an incubus or a succubus. And this is because what was created. When you strip the natural order from something, you take the alkali from something, it now becomes a suspended particle of incompletion. But what has been learned, and you can see today in science when they talk about GMOs, in order to sustain something again, you have to implement an artificial product that mimics the actual alkali entity. And a lot of products today that we find that don't have seeds in them or don't have the whole nutritional balance inside them, the suspended element that's placed inside of it to make the product seem real again is actually starch, or it's a refined sugar, or it's a corn, you feel me? Some type of starch to sustain it. But moving forward, Yaqub had these white folks get into Eden from out of Samaria, and they started to get into Israel, and they started to kill, steal, and destroy, and cause a lot of chaos. That led to a lot of crusades that led to a lot of wars because some of the people in Eden, some of the people in Samaria believed that these people were for good. They were able to do things that were different. You know what I mean? They looked different. They were appealing. And again, the primitive people, before they were robbed of the mark of Elohim, took pleasure in things that look appealing to the eye. Just like the apple of my eye. What a hell of a saying. You know what I'm saying? Moving forward. From this, because the elders started to realize that these new white cultured, blue-eyed, blonde-haired devils, or people that were created from the Shabazz, were causing havoc in the land of life and the land of good and evil, they had to be cast out of both of these promised lands. And from that, they had to cross the burning sands. From them crossing the burning sands, because if you don't have melanin in your skin, and you don't have nothing to protect your skin, you know what I mean? They had the blindfold placed it over their eyes because they had poor vision, so they wouldn't go blind from the reflection of the sun hitting the sand and hitting their skin. They had to wear the little coil and blanket cloth around them like a potato sack wrapped around their waist, and then they had to have their wrists tied over, left over right, and they were tied to their other brother of bondage or sister of bondage and forced to walk miles, hundreds of miles, into the mountains of Iberia, into the mountains of the Caucasus. Okay? And because the balance of the earth had been shooken so much because of the wars and the killing and the stealing and destroying that these caucasoids had caused, it caused the Earth's polarity to shift. Okay, the Earth's polarity began to shift because there were great wars. The Sumerians had figured out how to create technology to protect these people. Yaqub had taught these white caucasoids, the total degenerate opposite of the people of Elohim, mathematics and great science. And because he taught them great mathematics and great science, they knew how to compute and create things that were not of the Most High, creating spliced animals, creating genetic mutations that were never seen, phenomena never seen before, some Godzilla type shit, some King Kong type shit, you know what I mean? Some Clash of the Titans type shit. It was some shit. Moving forward. But that whole paradigm during that time led to the shifting of the poles because the Earth wasn't in harmony. You know what I mean? We have there are frequencies around us all day, every day. My voice is giving off a frequency. When I speak, my bones are vibrating right now. My muscles are moving to the tune of my vibrato coming out of my sound box, my speaker box. You know what I mean? My vocal cords are vibrating based off of the sound and air escaping in and out of my mouth. Okay? And what happens is the polarity of the Earth, because the vibration of that damage happening in the Earth, it shifted everything. It started an ice age over there in the Caucasus Mountains where these white people were forced to be in bondage. And then bondage, the ice age caused that natural tropical weather that was stable across the whole Earth. It caused it to go into ice age where they were at. So now forced to live in these Caucasus Mountains, the snow started to fall. The terrain became tougher. The plant life that used to be there wasn't there anymore. But there were animals still around. The air wasn't as full of oxygen. It was because it was colder. It was more bitter. I couldn't go outside to breathe in that cold, bitter air. I could freeze to death instantaneously. So what they had to learn to do is to study the new terrain. They had to learn how could they survive in the midst of all this calamity. And the only way they could survive was to take the life of another in order to live. And this is where that savage-like or lower-like nature of the animal that Nick Cannon was talking about comes from. Okay? So the Heru and Maketi, or the Sphinx, talks about that we must master the priesthood knowledge. The man head is the priesthood knowledge of 360 degrees. They teach that in the Eastern world in the Valley of the Kings and the temples for those who want to become a master mason of 360 degrees. It takes about 40 years to master this. Moses is somebody who we speak about who has done this. This is an anthropomorphic caricature, but moving forward. But Moses is somebody who we speak about. It takes 40 years to master that. But over here in the Western civilization, you're only taught 33 degrees. It takes 360 degrees, just like this wheel you see behind me. It takes 40 years to master that. Over here in America or in the Western world, they teach you only 33. Only 33. Now, what happens is they had to live in this Ice Age time period. And the Ice Age period lasted over 2,000 years, and we're still in a little bit of a post-Ice Age, if you see right now, but the planet's warming up because of global warming, all these fossil fuels and all this stuff that's going on. But what happens is they started to face genetic mutation. Being forced to live in a cave and hillside for so long, you're forced to not do what your spirit tells you. Your pineal gland becoming calcified because you have no access to sunlight. Okay? Because you have no access to sunlight because your pineal gland is calcified, the soul or the ether cannot have a place to sit inside of that vessel. So now that vessel can only attune to its animal-like nature, which is some survival of the fittest mentality. The idea of having to hunt to survive. So this is where the Goths, the Vandals, the Slavics, who lived in those cold terrains, they had to hunt to survive. They had to feed off the blood of another animal or a mammal in order to sustain living in those harsh conditions. This wasn't by choice. This was based upon a necessity to survive. So what Nick Cannon was talking about was the people of past time who had to fight to survive. Now, in comparison to white people in America, white people need to get it straight. White people are not white people in America. They used to be white people back in the day, okay? That whole thing that happened with Yaqub, it was a great scholar who created these degenerates who were the recessive of the melanin. Melanin people receive information from the sun, which teaches them to receive information from plant matter. They eat the plant matter. That plant matter gives them strength, just like a 500-pound gorilla eats grains, vegetables, and leaves all day. It has the strength of fucking 20 men, okay? A gorilla's straight muscle, or an elephant. An elephant is freaking a monstrosity of a creature, but it only eats vegetables. A panda, you know what I'm saying? A orangutan, big as hell, has the strength of multiple men, but a vegetarian. But now you look at a cheetah, you look at a leopard, you look at a panther, or even a lion, you know what I mean? Or even a python, or even the strength of them doesn't come off of the natural alkali energy around them. It comes off of them feeding off of the energy in which they eat. Like if a lion doesn't eat for a while, it won't get strong. It won't be strong. If a shark doesn't eat, it can only get as big as the environment is in. Whereas a gorilla, if it's leaves around the gorilla all day, that gorilla gonna be big as that tree, if it so chooses to. Moving forward. But what happens is the people who were living in those colder terrains were forced to step down into the animal-like nature and had to hunt to survive. And that was something that became a part of that genetic DNA pool, okay? Because they had to fight to survive in those colder and tougher terrains, and they had to hunt to survive and feed off of livestock and sleep with their animals and wear the fur of the animals or the carcasses of other animals, it was seen as taboo to those who had dwelled and inhabited in the sun for such a long time. If I live in the sun all day and it's about 85 and up every day, and it's a whole bunch of palm trees, coconuts, papayas, mangoes, kiwis, all this fruit around me, I'm gonna be butt ass naked and happy. I'm gonna want to go eat some of this amazing abundance of the rainbow I see around me. Berries, fruits, nuts, grains, leafy vegetables. I'm not worried about that cow eating that grass. You know what I mean? Did you see the load he just dropped? Man, forget all that. You see them pineapples over there, though? You see them nectarines over there? That's some cherries. Hold up. You know what I'm saying? That was the mentality of those who lived in the sunlight. And if the brothers and sisters who were robbed of their melanin or the mark of Elohim, if they received their mark back, they would understand. But they weren't in history because they were held in a captivity because of the Ice Age for so long. As the Ice Age began to kind of make way for the Moors to want to travel, the Moors were Arabs, okay? I'm moving through history. This is a 2,000-year time plane that I'm giving you guys right now, okay? Matter of fact, I'm going from 6,000 years to 2,000 years, okay? So, after about 2,000 years of the Ice Age having occurred, the genetic mutation of these people started to happen. So they thought it was a necessity to have to hunt to survive, okay? They thought that they had to feed off the flesh of another animal. They thought that living in a cave or sleeping with their animals or acting savage-like was the proper way of life. But it was the way of life for them because that's all they knew in order for their people to survive. But now that the planet has went from being ill and sick and is starting to turn back, a new day is beginning to come into place. And what that new day coming into place is the Moors. The Moors were Arabs, some were North Africans who traveled the world, and they studied the great seven seas. They figured out the currencies of the oceans and created these boats called little corvettes. Okay? These little corvettes would travel around the world, and they would pretty much, you could travel from America back to Africa or Amawak back to Eden in a matter of weeks as opposed to months. You know what I'm saying? And the Moors encountered Iberia. They got into Iberia. They started to cohabitate in Iberia with some of the uncivilized people and began to teach them how to read, how to write. They started to teach them about the practices of Muhammad and Islam, okay? And then some of them started even to come in and talk about Yeshua, Yahya Shaya. Christianity became a thing that was talked about during the time when it came to civilizing these caucasoid people who lived up in Iberia. Okay, Iberia is the predated name for Europe. Okay, Europe didn't get the name Europe until it was named after an African Moorish queen or princess. Her name was Europa. Okay, so after they had essentially been civilized by the Moors had civilized a good bit of Spain, Portugal, Italy, and Sicily. Okay, they have universities throughout these countries. They have a university open to this day. It's in Spain, and it's called the University of Saint Cure. The Moors were considered Anglo-Saxon. This is a Latin word for the black scholars, okay? Anglo is a Latin word for angelic or scholastic. Saxon is for black, okay? The Anglo-Saxons. So, what happens is after the Moors had civilized some of them, they started encountering these great warriors, the Vandals, the Goths, the Vikings. You know what I mean? These were great warriors who had fought for generations to protect their land, to live off by the sea. You know what I mean? The stuff that you see in Game of Thrones, or you see in Red Bad or Beowulf. This is not mythology, but this is true historical province. The Nephilim dwelled among us, and these things, the supernatural activities and abilities of these people, became very true during that time. So how we talk about Thor, Odin, and Valhalla, and Odin, and all this stuff like that, these characters come from out of that principle of, or the lifestyle of the Goths, the Vandals, and the Slavics, or which we know today as the Swedish, the Polish, the Germans, and even the Russians. You feel me? They have this inside their DNA pool where they would come from great warriors, okay? Because they had to hunt to survive. The survival of the fittest mentality was a very necessity during the terrain and the time they were living in. Now, what happens is the Moors start to educate some of them, and then the uncivilized, or the Vikings, and the Slavs and the Gavis have met these people who are learning to read and write, who are from Europe now, who are from Iberia. So the uncivilized are meeting the civilized, and the civilized want to expand the territory and the thinking in which the Moors had given them. The uncivilized are like, look, fuck that paper, fuck that book, I'm not with that. I learned from the stars, I learned from the trees, I learned from the plants. Some of them practiced the arts of which they had learned from some of the Moors and some of the alchemists they had come in contact with over the generations in life. The practicing of what they would consider magic or witchcraft. This is where all this had come from, and the church was about, teaching them the principles of civility and humility, and how to be of the upper echelon, to not be more of your animal-like nature, but to have an understanding of your dominion as a man or woman. Now, that led to a great crusade of multiple generations over and over again, where the European nations were fighting and the Anglo-Saxons were helping and fighting to gain land against the Vikings, against the Vandals, against the Slavics, against the Goths, against the, many of these Nordic warriors. You feel me? And from this, the Crusades led to the Dark Ages, because some people who were uncivil started to believe the civil, and some of the civil started to believe the uncivil, and they began to intermingle and interbreed, okay? So that savage-like genetic pool is now meeting with the pool of people who don't necessarily have a savage-like nature, and now they're intertwining. So now it's been coming ingrained in the DNA. Nick Cannon was talking about how people had this ingrained in their DNA. Now, that is very true for those people back in the day, and it's very true to some people today. Today, some people have it. But in America, when we talk about the history of the white man and the white power over here in America, the term white comes from out of Britannia. It wasn't until after the United Kingdom was established as an official monarch, which means they had established three great nations into one. Okay, the United Kingdom, which was Britannia, Scotland, and Scotland, and Ireland. Okay, these became three great nations under one. Okay, one rule. And King James took the church and the crown and combined them together. When the church and the crown are combined together and endorse people's belief systems and the people's understanding of what law and order is, they became one. And when they became one, people had to either get down or lay down. You know what I mean? That's how the Crusades unfolded with these great wars. And that savage-like barbaric, or that great warrior spirit that lied within inside of these people who had been from the Caucasus Mountain, who are now intermingled with these civilized people who didn't necessarily have to fight like that, that nature stayed dormant inside of them during throughout the Great Crusades, and it stayed a part of them to those who survived to tell the story. Now, those who came to America, the New World, before they came here, they had traveled to Africa, okay? When they traveled into Africa, the Portuguese came into Africa because they was down into the Mediterranean. The Sicilians got into Africa, started to train with some of the North Africans and some of the Moors, and the Moors began to sleep with some of them. They used to have little prostitute parlors over there in Sicily and Italy. They had universities, they had schools, they had castles, all that shit all throughout Europe. Now what happens is when the Portuguese started to see how beautiful the people eating was, it was always tropical, the weather was always beautiful, fruit for miles and miles. The women were beautiful in livelihood. The kids running butt naked in the sand, because you outside, you're receiving life energy from the light source. Light equals life. You know what I mean? If I put a plant out in the light and I put the seed out in the light in the soil with water, hydroponic, all you need is light, nutrients, and a little bit of water. You need the light most importantly. You feel me? The light created a chance for life to thrive. This is what the Portuguese seen. This is what the Spaniards seen. This is what the conquistadors seen. And the primitiveness that they had seen in the people, how compassionate they was because of the abundance, the savage-like nature, or that predator-like nature, had begun to awaken inside of the dormant sleeping beast, which was the Europeans who had mingled, the civilized and uncivilized. That genetic code began to awaken, and the ideas began to spark of conquering Africa. And before you knew it, Africa became an imperialized country, which was categorized and stripped and pillaged, and still to this day has been stripped and pillaged. They don't talk about in the history books about Leopold II, how he was responsible for killing a generation of Africans, a whole generation. Now we talk about Bill Gates killing generations of Africans. They don't tell you about that, but they tell you that motherfucker make Microsoft, and how he's a part of the World Health Organization and helping all this other stuff. Bill Gates, great inventor, but terrible person. Giving kids vaccinations and all this stuff like that. Lying to the African people, giving them syphilis, giving them Ebola, giving them AIDS. Tell me if this makes sense, because I'm going to stop talking and move on. How do you say that an African woman fucking a monkey makes AIDS? That don't make sense. Or a chicken meeting a sick pig, and the sick pig get the chicken sick, and now you got pig swine flu. The devil is a lie. That don't even make sense. Moving forward. But over here in America, that dormant, that nature that started them imperializing Africa came over here to America. And when it got into America, the same way how the Crusades happened in Europe and led to the dark ages of famine, death, disease, and war, because the civilized were fighting the uncivilized, and they were killing each other, and they didn't know which was God and what was God, it led to them wanting to have to find a new world, which is over here in Amawat, or the Western world, which was now called America, named after Americana Vespucci. It's common to see that Iberia was named after a Moorish woman, a black Moorish woman named Europa, and now you find out that America was named after a European man named Cicero, Americana Vespucci, and in Africa was named after another Greco-Roman philosopher named Cicero Africanus. You feel me? So all this changing of hands has been happening for centuries, okay? And they don't teach us this necessarily in the broad spectrum of history class, because people, if we knew this as the masses, we wouldn't fall into the indoctrination schools that they offer us today. We wouldn't fall under the guise that they offer us today, because we wouldn't see it suitable, because we would have access to truth, okay? Now, after the Great Crusades that led these people to getting over here to America, the English had established an idea to make sure that this slavery, to make sure this imperialism and the colonization of Africa and keeping the idea of America stable so that that bloodline will grow and flourish. The way they did it is the English endorsed this. The United Kingdom endorsed the idea to keep the crown and the church as a power source, okay? Did you know that every president of the United States, when they become elected president of the United States, they have to go back. They have to. Yes, they have to go back to England. They have to go back to the United Kingdom and kiss the ring of the Queen. They have to give thanks to the crown. Why is that? Well, I'll tell you why. During the Great American Revolution, we didn't secede actually from the United Kingdom. We became an independent business source, okay? It was always about business. Britannia created a business source. The transatlantic slave trade was endorsed by Britannia, the crown and the faith. It started in Portugal, but Portugal was too savage-like. They was just too comfortable with doing it. The Spaniards, they didn't have much organization either. The French and Italian, they really didn't care for much of it. They had their own way of going about it. But the British, the English, they had their way of how they could see a profit and how they can keep that bloodline going. And they created the transatlantic slave trade. And other people of the European descent endorsed this idea. And Europe became, Britain became the leading head, was the spearhead to the whole idea of the amazing race to sustain the white blood cells, the white gene, the white cells, the white bloodline for longer than it was going to last, because the Dark Ages led to the bubonic plague. It led to the intermingling of so many different races and culture, the fall of the post-knowledge and the rising of this new faith of Christianity, this new faith of Islam. It's like their whole world was crumbling before them. So them fighting to find their way to sustain their living they had to tap into the animal-like nature for some of them, and other of those they became captives of war. And for other of those, they found refuge in a new world, and they were under the English descent. Now what happens is this term of white came from this Willie Lynch Jim Crow idea that came from out of the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom comes up with this idea of saying, they have a pecking order how they perceive the bourgeoisies, you know what I mean? Who was the royal court, who was the royal family, who were the merchants, who were the noblemen, the just, the dukes, the duchess, and then who were the common folks, the peasants, and so on and so forth, you know what I mean? And because of that, they even did that with the European nations, as far as the French didn't like the Italians didn't like the French, the Brits didn't like the Irish didn't like the Scottish, and all this battling of the white on white crime was happening over there in Europe before they got over here and created this new world. Now they get over here and create this new world. They kill off millions of Native Americans, and then they lie to the remaining 7 million, and then tell the 5% of Africans that they brought over here that they tell 5% of them come from Africa, but they tell all 100% that they come from Africa. And 7 million of them actually were born here and are from here. That's the topic for another time. But what happens is they keep that bloodline going on, and these Englishmen have created the United States. We go back, we still have to give reference to the crown over there in Europe, but we're an independent nation, we're an independent corporation. Each state becomes its own independent business itself. That's why we have to pay state and federal taxes, okay? Now, after this whole mess happens, people of English descent start to realize that they can't build this whole nation by themselves. They start having more slaves. Okay, the slaves are starting to outnumber them, which led up to, the Civil War happening. The Civil War led to more white people dying off, and they say, you know what, we can't have too many black people outliving us. If we keep killing our brothers and sisters, whether they have the Confederacy or the Union, I'm jumping through history with this, you gotta follow me. Stay with me. If I keep killing off more of my brothers and sisters throughout the Confederacy and Union, the black slaves will outnumber us, and soon they will revolt if they're smart enough. So what they start doing is start allowing some states to be freed. Some of the states begin to be freed, and this whole idea of them fighting to conquer the world comes from that savage-like predator nature which is ingrained into the DNA. But what happens is these Englishmen were fighting the British during, the American Revolution. The American Revolution turned around to be the Civil War. The Civil War was between an in-house battle between Englishmen fighting for whether they should have slaves or not. Okay? Now, after the slavery part ended, the Emancipation Proclamation came up. After the Emancipation Proclamation came up, you have the time of the slave codes, the Jim Crow laws, and all this stuff like this, the sharecropping. This was all still kept inside as a way of the prey over the predator. And the prey over the predator, or that survival of the fittest mentality, the semantics of that changed into systematic racism, okay? So when Nick Cannon was trying to hit on was talking about systematic racism and the play on semantics. They don't teach you the history I just told you about right now. And if we want to talk about white power in America and how white became a thing in America, white became a thing in America because it was after World War II. It was after they had realized that, we were losing the numbers, the census after World War One and Two, that the white numbers and the mortality rates were changing. They decided to classify other European cultures that were not of English descent as white. Okay? So if you weren't of English descent and you moved over here in the early 19th century, when you see that big influx of the Italians, you see a big influx of Germans, you see a big influx of Russian, you see a big influx of Irish people coming over here. Remember, they had a famine in Ireland, and the only way they could sustain was through the potatoes. They had a potato famine. The potato famine caused a lot of people to die off. You know what I'm saying? It was so much shit going on throughout history that they don't really press to tell us, to make it clear to us to understand that you would perceive what Nick Cannon was saying was blasphemy. Now, what happens is during this great war that led to a lot of people dying and a lot happening over here in America, they started to offer land to, even after slavery, they started to offer land to people who were not of English descent because they didn't want to give these people Elohim, the people with black descent, the black man and women, they didn't want to give them land. So they started giving Italians jobs. They started making the Italians the cops. They started making the Scottish the firemen. They started allowing the Germans to be your butchers. You know what I mean? I'm just giving you the examples. Your Frenchmen became your pastry, your bread artists, and your pasta makers. And that mammy who used to breastfeed the child was no longer needed because they had other nurses now. And everything that was supposed to be an opportunity for the black and brown man and the red man was now robbed because other European nations were now categorized as white. Okay? White is for those who were of Aryan descent, who was blue eyes and blonde hair, or they came from out of what was considered white or pure blood, out of the crowns out there, what was pure blood. But if you were a Sicilian back in the day, man, you were considered a mook. That was a nigga. That's a derogatory sentence for Italians would call them niggas. You know what I'm saying? And then for the British would consider Irishmen as slum dogs. You feel me? It's so much. So like Nick Cannon, when he's saying the savage like mentality, that's something that's ingrained into those who have the genetic pool of those who come from out of like the Caucasus Mountains, who come from out of Russia, who have German, Slavic, or Sweden ancestry in their blood. They have that Neanderthal savages like DNA in that gene pool. Okay. The white power idea was a systematic way of oppressing and controlling the masses. See, before you were saying you were white, you were repping your flag or what country you came from. Italians were proud to be Italians. You know what I'm saying? They were proud of what they did. The Frenchman was proud of what the French man and woman, and the Italian woman and man were proud of where they came from. The Greek man and Greek woman were proud of where they came from. The German man was proud of where he came from. But when you came to the New World, which is the land of the refugees, the land of the home of the free and the brave, okay, they came over here. That whole ideal shifted, okay? Especially during the time after the Emancipation Proclamation. We have to make sure we don't allow these people to get ahead of us and these melanated people to take that seat back, okay? Take that place back, that rightful place back. And that's under the guise of a nature-like mentality, your nature-like mentality of a predator versus prey. And people have changed the predator versus prey mentality to systematic racism, social inequality, police brutality. You feel me? And that's because they themselves who are oppressing us were once oppressed. It's a whole big cycle. I had a friend call me today. Actually was concerned, like, you know, he's one of my white friends. He's one of my white colleagues. His good friend. I know him for years. I was in a man wedding. I got love for him and his wife. Shout out to my man Patrick, yo. Good people, y'all. I love you, man. Love you, bro. Him and Christiana. What I had to explain to him is like what Nick Cannon was talking about is history and in genetics. They don't teach us this in the masses. They don't teach us this in public school. And if they did, you would see kids of melanation begin to manipulate matter and do things of manifestation that kids you don't be able to do. People would start to follow the proper diet. The whole system that they created over here would implode on itself if people knew the truth of who they were. So that idea of white power, again, came from the fascists of the Englishmen not wanting to be outnumbered by the Aboriginal or the black man that was over here, or the brown and red man that was over here, after they had faced the Emancipation Proclamation and they had faced several other wars after the Civil War and even the World War. They started to welcome in other people. That's why that idea of 40 acres and a mule, that was a whole bunch of hearsay coming for the black man, and the black woman. It was a whole bunch of Johnny come lately noise. So Nick Cannon was not wrong for what he said. I think he was wrong in the context of what he used it. And white people over here in America, you're not fully white, first of all. If you think about it, the mammy used to breastfeed the baby, okay? The mammy was a black woman. That's black breast milk going into a white baby, okay? Or a caucasoid baby, whatever you want to call it. A pink baby, whatever you want to call it. It was going inside that baby. They were feeding them, okay? And then on top of that, the slave masters sleeping with the slaves, you feel me? And creating mulatto or light-skinned brothers and sisters, you feel me? And then over here, the Irishman or Italian and Sicilian, they used to interbreed with the Moorish people back in the day. This is before America became America, you feel me? So everybody's talking, and if you do your little ancestry.com today, you go give them your DNA, you won't find not one damn person in America who subscribe to the white or black culture will have pure white blood, will have pure black blood, because this is the land of the refugees. We've been interbreeding for years. So don't you get caught up with this hocus pocus shit they put on the news and telling you about, oh, this is white power and black power. You can subscribe to a culture, but you really need to have knowledge of self first before you start opening your mouth. And knowledge of self is that we're the human race. You know what I'm saying? We all eat shit and piss the same way. Some might have more high social status than the others, just like they had back in the day of Europe, just like they had it back in the day of Kush. They had a social pecking order, how things went to sustain order. But don't get caught up when they tell you, you see the tabloids and they give you this little information on social media. You got to tap into Netaru. You got to tap into the Meta Netaru. You got to go outside, receive that sunlight energy. Take off your mask and breathe in the fresh air. COVID ain't in the air, man. It's in your mind. To those people who have gotten sick from COVID-19, been hospitalized, who have died, they've been finding people in body bags who they said were announced dead. One dude found his grandmother in a body bag, breathing, alive, and they said she had died from COVID. This is the time we're in. That Mayan calendar they tell you about is saying it was 2012 happening, and 8 years ago. 2012 is now. They teach us Ishfet over here. But this is the Western civilization. They teach us Ishfet. But in the Eastern civilization, we were taught of Mayat. Okay? This is all principle. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood. We don't wrestle against this white and black idea of it's a white race versus a black race. This race war bullshit. That's bullshit. Okay? It's bullshit. The race war is bullshit. That we don't wrestle against flesh and blood, but we wrestle against the principles. Okay? The principles that we keep, the content and the character in which we are. You don't judge a man by how he looks, you judge a man by his principles. You heard the saying, you give respect to the janitor just as much respect as you give to the CEO. So I'm going to leave y'all with that. Please study to show thyself approved. And last of all, don't be humble. Be great.